With that being said, I'd love to dive into kind of our first set of questions. And it's kind of just setting the stage and kind of understanding where we are in our career journey. So I'll start with Montana and Laura. Did you have a career path mapped out ahead of time? Maybe Laura, I'll start with you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll start off by saying I didn't really have a career path laid out. I always wanted to work in sport, but didn't really know where I fit and what to do. When I moved out to BC, I started skiing and started picking up freestyle skiing at the young age of 25. And if you know anything about freestyle skiing, not the targeted age bracket. When I was learning, I found that I was often the only female training, and I found my success quite difficult. And then I had the opportunity to move to New Zealand and coach there and work in a snow sports school there that was made up of 51% women, which is quite rare in the snow sport industry. And it really showed me that there's success. I worked with a lot of high level skiers, snowboarders, and leadership. And from there, I really saw a path. When I came back to Canada, I came back with a goal to work within freestyle and girls and women in freestyle. I had a lot of flexibility in my journey because I think within that flexibility, you can offer opportunity and you never know what opportunity is going to lead you onto your next path. So for me, there was no plan and I stayed quite open and I'm quite excited on the path that it's led me down today.
I mean, that's a good point that that you mentioned about being able to be adaptable and kind of take things as they come. But I'm curious, in your time in New Zealand, how was that going from being the only woman kind of in your sport to then being in an environment where there's more representation? How was that experience for you?
I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed, having conversations and all. I think women in sport, we all have hurdles and successes, and to have that camaraderie among the women. But really seeing women successful in snow sports was a huge thing because where I started, I think it was maybe just a handful of women in the whole ski and board school. And it was really hard to see where that success could lead you. And was there a path for women in leadership? So it was really eye opening and great to have mentors who helped me along the way, who I still reach out to today.
Aw. Well, it's good to have that sense of kind of community and also just camaraderie, like you said. So I'm happy that that was such a positive experience for you. Montana, what about you? Did you have a career path mapped out ahead of time, or how was that for you?
Um, my career path is definitely to this point, no, I didn't. Same thing, like grew up in sport and went through school majoring in kinesiology. When I finished my undergrad, I knew I was really interested in the movement of the body and I was really interested in strength and conditioning. So I went to UBC, which brought me out west. But I was like, I'm going to be a strength and conditioning coach. This is where I'm at. And I finished when I was in college ski racing, and I didn't think I would ever come back to it. And then as I got out west, my schooling kind of brought me back into the ski racing world. And once I was in that world, I thought I had like a very linear path of like, I'm going to start at the club level and I'm going to coach my way up to the national team. And as a young coach, that was quite daunting because there didn't seem to be a linear pathway to get there. And there was a lot of different examples of a lot of different ways people were doing that, but there wasn't really any women that were going that way. So you kind of just like went into the unknown and tried to forge your own path. Um, but then as the more I got into coaching and I became a program director and ran a club for a few years, I really started to see like vast differences in girls ski racing and dropping out around like age 13, 14, 15, especially in BC. And more I found myself pulled a little bit away from the high performance stream and wanting to get to that national team and becoming more and more engaged in like how are we going to keep more girls in ski racing and make it a welcoming experience. And then on top of that, selfishly just wanting more female coaches. around because I didn't know if I needed them, but I knew we didn't have them. So we uh, I started really finding my passion that way, and I was able to move into a couple different roles with the Canadian para ski team for a year and had an amazing experience there. And then when I really started being able to have a little more impact was when I was with the BC ski team, and I came into the provincial team, and there was only a men's team at the time. And that was a big, again, an amazing experience. I loved the athletes that we worked with, but we, as an organization, realized we really need to have more female athlete leaders and female coaches being spotlighted so that people know there's a path and know that there's representation. And
Yeah.
that's where it really let me kind of steer into and lean into the passion that I had for starting Girls Fast Forward camps and trying to get more girls and women and like female identifying ski racers and coaches in BC to try to get together and have a community to build off each other and connect because we knew we didn't have the numbers, and then we knew that we wanted more, and that was a big thing for me that really started steering me, keeping the high performance, but also really wanting more engagement in the community and seeing how we needed to build more girls and women up in the sport. And again, the snow sports industry being fairly male dominated, this was a big push and also a big challenge. So it's still a work in progress, but it's brought me to Pacific Sport where I feel like I now have impact through multiple sports with and just have more get to gain more of a perspective of how other sports are doing this kind of work and advocating for more gender equity in their programs and building systems and policies that help build women up. And so that's kind of where I'm at now.
Well, it's interesting. I feel like there's a little bit of similarity in Laura's experience when, you don't have necessarily that representation to kind of look towards when you're figuring out your career journey. And maybe there wasn't a path, but hopefully, it sounds like you're kind of doing a full circle and you're ending up being that person for a young woman or a girl kind of figuring out where they may want to go for their career. I can kind of relate to that as well. I think in sport, I grew up playing a lot of soccer, and through most of my time being an athlete, I had almost no coaches who were women, maybe one or two, majority were men. But I think on the flip side in work, I've been able to kind of connect with a lot of women, and it does a lot to have that kind of camaraderie and community in the workspace as well. But I did want to turn to Emma and Kim. Can you also describe your journey and looking at where you are now? Did it always go to plan? And if you had a plan? But Emma, I'll start with you.
I definitely didn't have a plan.
Mhm.
I think if anyone had said to me, you'll be working in sport when I was like 18, I would have been, uh, it just wasn't even on my radar. Like I was always active, but I wasn't in sport. Um, which is interesting because I was just listening to that whole thing about the rally report and girls feeling that sport is for boys. And so maybe that was part of my experience growing up, but I wasn't really in organized sport, although I considered myself active. Um, but if I look back over my career, I think where I've ended up in sport is because of the whole area of community development. To me, it's about using sport as a bigger vehicle than just the physical activity. It's about trying to create community, and that's been a common thread throughout all of my work. And that's what I really enjoy about sport as a way to bring people together and to connect us. And it's interesting, actually, in preparing for this, I was reflecting and thinking, well, I've also ended up like prior to this, I was working in field hockey. And I've been involved in soccer in a all predominantly female club. Um, I think I've naturally oriented to team sports that are female based. And so sometimes, again, like I feel like I'm in this little bubble a little bit because listening to Montana and Laura, like I look around and I think, well, volleyball is like 70% female participation. So we're doing pretty good. And there's lots of girls that are active. And then you sort of step outside that bubble and you realize it's maybe a bit different. But I can certainly relate to where I feel like there are still gaps. I've seen in my career journey is in the leadership side and in the coaching and the refereeing, and that is definitely themes that continue in this. I mean, I think I was fortunate in my career to have a lot of female bosses as well, really right from the start. I think I predominantly had female managers than male, and so I think that really encouraged me to think, well, I can keep progressing on, which again maybe doesn't quite align with what Laura and Montana were saying, but it didn't make me sort of question things. But I think a link to that is the importance of finding someone that believes in you and that will give you that chance. Because I think my biggest kind of career change, if you like, was when I immigrated from the UK, because we had 2 one-way tickets and no jobs and nowhere to live. And it was a bit of a gamble. I gave up a good job and thought, well, let's try living somewhere else. Um, and I was fortunate enough to walk into a job basically with the 2010 Olympics and have somebody take a gamble on me who was like, I feel I did the exact same thing. Like, I came here, I didn't have a job. I admire what you're doing. I'll give you a chance. And it would happen to be actually a male. It wasn't a female. But I think it speaks to the fact that you have to seek out those people in your careers that you align yourselves with, and that who are there to like support you and to provide you with those opportunities when sometimes maybe you're like self-doubting yourself. Um, and I feel like that theme has continued now. I'm very fortunate that I have strong females on my board as well. And I really try and align myself, like my current president is the CEO of an organization, and I really try and align myself with people that I feel that I can learn from. And they could be male or female, but in my experience, I have definitely really enjoyed especially learning from those women who are doing roles and that I would aspire to being, and that I feel that I can sort of learn, and I'm not scared to go and say, I'm really interested in finding out how you would do this, or what do you think of this? And that's been really beneficial for me.
I mean, I like your point about, I mean, it really only takes one person to be an advocate to really change your experience, whether that is a man or a woman. But yeah, all it takes is that one advocate, whether, yeah, they're an ally. So I love, thank you for sharing. Kim, can you maybe share your journey or looking at where you are now? Did things always go to plan?
I can definitely say that things did not necessarily go to plan, although, you know, my journey, I've definitely been circling around this type of role with everything else that I was doing. I mean, I think the biggest thing that took a turn for me was when I had kids, really made me reflect and step back and identify where I wanted to be. And, you know, I'm really grateful for the work that I get to do. And I think the sport community really tied together all the different areas that I had been interested, whether when I was going to school, you know, initially I wanted to be a teacher, but I find that I get to do so much more. And I find I have a bigger impact than I ever imagined that I could have. And similar to Emma, if someone was going to ask me if I had seen myself working in sport, especially as a kid, I wouldn't have even known that there were this many possibilities available for someone like me. So, so yeah, it definitely did not go to plan. But you know, when those opportunities presented themselves and someone tapped me on the shoulder saying, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at this," that's where it really kind of opened my eyes a little bit more that yeah, there's just so much more out there than sometimes we think there is.
It's, I mean, similar to what Laura had previously said too, like having that willingness or kind of flexibility to, when someone comes to you and kind of presents a new way of looking at things and kind of diving in, you'll be surprised at where that leads you in your career. But I think for everyone, we've shared that maybe not so linear, or maybe you didn't have a plan, but that's okay. That's kind of part of the journey. But I did want to kind of, there's a bit of a mention of kids and maybe a bit of twists and turns, but I did want to kind of tap into challenges along the way in our career journey, or if there's any sticking points. So I'll start with Montana and Laura. What happened in your journey so far that posed as a challenge or maybe helped you move forward? Montana, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I feel like I feel like always cheesy saying like I did have some great mentors and felt like I had a lot of support through the majority of my coaching career, and then now on this side as well, feeling very supported to do these types of projects that we're now working on within the Kootenays. But I think the big one was having like there's two things that seemed like the top challenges for me, and one was maybe one that I didn't recognize. Like I didn't know at the time when I was going through my coaching career that I was probably craving like a female mentor
Mhm.
in the space, and just didn't have one. So I didn't know what I didn't know, and there's just no one really representing that above me. And so I felt like there was a lot of pressure for me to be representing not only myself as a coach and as a professional, but also and maybe if I feel like we've talked about this before, but you feel like you're kind of carrying the female a bit like perspective on your back all the time. And what you're saying and doing then reflects on what females in the coaching space do, which is a lot of pressure. And it's a lot of, you feel like there's a lot of eyes on you because if you do something that doesn't necessarily line up with the majority or the group in that realm, potentially they're going to be like, well, females don't line up with that route. Like there's not the space is different. And so that was one challenge that I felt the more I went through coaching was that there was a lot of weight on my shoulders to represent the female coaching population. And that was a lot. It weighed on me quite heavily at times. And then I think just as a coach, like it's not always perfect and you don't have, I mean, sport isn't perfect, so it's nothing and it is like you're always trying to get better and achieve more. But I struggled with definitely at times like I've had an experience where I had a leader that we'd worked hard to set a culture within our team and then feeling like that culture was being contradicted by the leadership above me. And then when bringing those issues up, you don't feel heard or validated or supported at that time. And looking back on that now, I think it's an experience that really pushed me to want to make sure that this doesn't happen to any other female coaches in our industry because it was a really hard experience for me. And then it also really made me question like look on the flip side of like I'm feeling really challenged in this position, but also I felt like there should have been more systems or policies in place to support the leadership to know what to do when these situations happened. And it was unfortunate that I didn't feel like that was in place. And I think everyone would have felt more supported if that was there. And that's something now I'm in the Pacific sport realm of multi-sport and trying to create more sustainable programming for helping sport like make more sustainable programming. That's something that's really in the back of my mind. Like, hey, there's systems that help you work through this stuff. Why weren't they in place when I had this experience?
Yeah.
So that was a big one where um, you're trying, you feel like you're going through something really hard, but then at the same time, you're trying to advocate for yourself. You're not feeling heard. And at the same time, you're trying to fix the problem that exists because no one else is fixing it. And so
Mm,
it's like, it's really hard to do all of those things while you're feeling like your career is being challenged. And you're also like, this shouldn't happen like this. And then you're also like, how do we fix this? And you're like, which person am I in that in that role?
yeah.
So that
Which
was
hat am
really
I wearing?
challenging.
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about policies, I think that's the difference when you're in a position to be reactive versus proactive, right? So if something does happen, you're not feeling like you are carrying that extra weight because there is already something in place to support you. But when you were talking about lack of mentorship and that being maybe a bit isolating, like what do you do in those moments when it is you, like just you, yourself, and I? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate for like finding the support that you need to like take care of yourself and before you're trying to take care of others. So like I did have my support in terms of like I have a therapist that I was meeting with monthly that was like able to help me work through things outside of what was happening in the sports system. Because again, I feel like Emma kind of mentioned it, like your sport bubble can feel quite like a small bubble. And so it was nice to have resources outside of my own sport. And I did find that I was reaching for more, I guess not mentorship, but it was really pushing me to try like really hard to connect with other female coaches. Because the feeling that I had when I connected with those coaches was quite different than the feeling I had when I was on my own. And like there was times where we would be racing in Europe and I legitimately wouldn't see a female for 3 days. Like there was no coach, there was no ref, there was like no one in the space. It was a men's race. I got full access for the bathroom, but everything else was like quite challenging. And you don't realize it till a little bit later that like the second you connected with someone that could share your perspective, you're like, I needed this. And so it really made me go on the hunt to find more. And when there wasn't more, it really pushed me to help create more because the second we got our first girls fast forward camp together, all the coaches sat in the room and were like, this was so great for the girls. And then all the coaches got together and you're like, I didn't know this was the feeling you could have.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're like, we need to do this more. And you look in the room of like on a regular race day or training day, and you're like, there's all these men working together. And I was like, do you get this feeling all the time? Like, this is so cool. And it's just something that like I eventually found, but I was craving it. And I like I mentioned, I didn't know I needed it.
Yeah.
And similar to Emma, like I had amazing mentors, but they're all male. And so they really supported me, but I just didn't know that I was looking for that female representation so much until we finally got a crew together and we're like, this was cool. Let's do
Mm.
this way more. So that was kind of exciting. And it's like pushed me into this space now to even do that while I'm not in the sport, like trying to create space for those female coaches in the Kootenays at least, and that type of thing.
I mean, it shows the power of being in community with people that you feel represented by, but also how intentional you have to be to get in those spaces. But Laura, I'm curious, did you experience the same thing, or did you like what were the challenges, if any, that kind of helped, or something that helped you move forward in this space?
I think for me, a challenge was to be patient. I think
Mhm.
as women, we're often stamped with the best before date when we can be successful to have reached certain milestones by a certain age. And I think sometimes you bring that into your work and you're like, I haven't reached XYZ by a certain age. Like, there's no way I can do this. So I found being patient and knowing success isn't linear and everyone is on their own path and you can have success in so many ways. And going back to my plan, being just flexible for opportunity. I had a coach once tell me, he was like, you know what? You're at the door and one day they're going to give you a key. You get the key and it's a code door and you're like, why did they do this to me? And you have, that setback, and it's okay, you just have to work through it. And just knowing that sometimes people get the code right off the bat, sometimes people get a key, sometimes people get three numbers. You don't have to be successful by a certain age, you don't have to reach certain milestones, and there isn't a best before date on what you can do. And I think being patient and being having a bit of security now in myself that, we're all on our own path and there's no right or wrong as well. So that had been a challenge and I think we're all working through it.
I mean, I think you made a great point about women and maybe the certain considerations that we have to take into account of where we are in our career and how that would, like, personal things going on in our life and how that would impact our work as a challenge. And when you're experiencing that, being a little bit flexible and being okay with the ebbs and flows of it all. But I want to kind of direct towards Emma and Kim. Did any of these challenges persist later on in your path, and are there new ones or different ones that you've experienced? Kim, I'll start with you.
Sure. I think for myself, a few challenges have really stuck out in my journey. And, one would be early on, being one of the few females working in sport and looking around for those mentors. Like you said, Montana, not knowing that you craved it. And sometimes, bringing ideas forward, found was really frustrating because I could bring something up and sometimes it would just feel like it was falling on deaf ears. And then, a time period would go by and all of a sudden a male counterpart brings it forward and everybody's on board and you're sitting there and you're like, we were, why is this having a different impact hearing it from this space versus when I brought it forward? And I find that I really had to find those ambassadors and champions that were willing to partner with me to just kind of elevate that voice. And personally, other challenges that I think we're still facing as women in sport really comes around family planning. Something that stuck out, having 3 children and experiencing 3 mat leaves, kind of the exiting of a mat leave and coming back. And when we talk about systems and policies, I don't think we think about enough those systems for supporting women re-entering the workforce, especially within that first month. There's so much disruption with changes in routine, personally and professionally, and feeling that you have to come back at 100%. And emotionally, I just remember that first month being so extremely draining. So giving more thought as to supporting those transitions for women and or parents, because now there's parental leave that we didn't really use while I had my children. But so when I think about some of those challenges, there are ways that we can support our female leaders for knowing what that's going to look like when they come back and being ready to support it and not being so reactive as we're doing that. And just family planning as well. There's still challenges where I'll hear things like, oh, it must be nice that you have to leave this meeting to go pick up your kids. Mm-hmm. And it's, I am very grateful for the community that I have and the flexibility in my role, because that work-life balance is important in that family planning piece. But I think there's still work to be done, that, it's acceptable that I shouldn't have to feel like I need to justify why I'm leaving to pick up my kids from school or participating in their lives as well. And I think there's still some work that we can do around those conversations and what it looks like. And, even being an athlete, when I had my children, people were like, oh, well, you didn't plan that around your competitive season. And it's like, sometimes things are unplanned and we have to be flexible and adaptable. And it's not always around our sport cycles, and it's not always going to fit in. And, we just do our best to adapt and roll with it.
Yeah, I mean, if you're kind of receiving those comments, I can understand how frustrating that would be. But Emma, you were nodding your head a little bit. Did you have a similar experience, or kind of what challenges kind of persisted throughout your career?
Well, I think I relate to everything that the other 3 have already said, but starting with Laura's idea of patience, like I definitely think, and obviously there's so many different female experiences out there, you can't really categorize, but in my particular one, family was something that I wanted to do. And so even feeling that kind of awareness that my husband wasn't having to think, well, when's a good time that I should try and fit in a kid, if I can be so lucky to even plan that. And that's another whole area of discussion. But like, I need to think about, like, well, I'm in this, and I worked in major events, so there are very fixed deadlines in that, and you have to kind of figure out, well, maybe if I want to have more than one, I might have to have one now, and then I'm going to have a break, and then like that, just that kind of even mental thought process. And then looking at my husband and feeling kind of jealous that he didn't really have to go through that, like, oh, I'm going to have to plan to take a break somewhere in my journey. And then I think the other side of that, which Kim was also alluding to, is that invisible burden of like just trying to juggle. I have 3 kids too, and sometimes the effort to actually get me to my desk in the morning, and like I've made lunches, I've checked my text messages, I've done something for school, I've organized what's happening after school, I've done, like, I'm thinking about the weekend, I've got 15 emails from their sport organizations. Like by the time I get to work, I'm like, I'm actually really tired. And now I have to do a full day work, and then I have to do the other side of the day. And then I have to probably go and work late at night because I haven't
Mhm.
managed to get it all done during the day. So I don't know that that's necessarily a uniquely female experience anymore because we have shifted, but I do still think that most females who are in have families would be able to relate to that experience, and it is exhausting.
Yeah.
So I think that's one sort of challenge. I mean, again, we're lucky. I think sport does. I'm the same way. I have the flexibility. I'm working from home today. I can go and watch my daughter go and compete after school, but then I do have to try and make that up. There's only so many hours in the day, so I'm trying to piecemeal that together. I think the other piece, which I guess was linked to what Montana was saying, is, the I've definitely noticed as my career has progressed up, there are fewer and fewer females in the room. And, I wouldn't say it's all the time, but I definitely had my first experience, I think, maybe about 8 years ago, where I walked into like a sport council meeting and I looked at everybody and I was like, they are all white males. And there's me. And I had my first kind of comment back, which felt like a bit of a pat on the head. And I would say what I did was, and I think I've become, again, there's that balance. I was listening to Montana and thinking there's such a balance there between, you want to advocate, you want to create change, and you want to like disrupt those kind of experiences. But at the same time, I think I've learned as I've got older, I have to conserve my own energy. So now
Yeah.
I'm just going to create my own space, work with the
Mhm.
people who want to work with me. And there's a lot of them, whether they're male or female. And maybe that's right. Maybe that's not the correct way to create social change. But I think you get to the point where you have to just do it yourself and you have to seek out people that you feel are going to fill you up and meet you halfway, rather than continually bash your head against certain environments or individuals where you just know that, you might have made a comment to me that I don't appreciate, and I can call you out on it, which I will, but I'm not sure that's going to change how you
Right.
behave. So I'm going to seek out people who are more positive. And I think in that sense, as I've gone through my career, I've become a bit more discerning than maybe I was when I was younger and just
Mhm.
took it on.
I mean, when you're talking about how to react in these situations or when you receive those negative comments, or whether you feel like there's a timeline that you kind of have to meet being a woman in this space, or family planning, I'd say that all speaks to the emotional labor that women kind of have to go through, balancing personal life and career. But Emma, I can empathize as well. I remember to your experience receiving a negative comment. I remember I was applying to this work experience while I was back in school, and the panel was mostly all white males. And after introductions, there was a really inappropriate comment based on my me being a woman, the only woman in the room, in my appearance, and me not having to work the event and instead working the door with my beautiful smile. And immediately I felt pretty shocked. I looked around the room and I thought, oh, this is a culture that's probably normal. And if this is a person that I'm gonna directly work with, it's not a space that I want to be in. But taking into consideration the questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're trying to meld personal life and career, it's really finding a space that's psychologically safe. So you feel like if you do have a question, you feel comfortable doing so, or speaking up against something that you may disagree, you feel comfortable doing so, or also finding community in that space to, provide support or get mentorship. But a question that I kind of want to pose to everyone is, when you are in spaces where there are few women, if any other women, what challenges have you faced related to your role? Maybe I'll start with Montana.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that a lot. And I felt like when I was in, I feel like there's such a different space when, like you said, like when you're psychologically safe and you feel supported.
Mhm.
It really lets you be your authentic self. And that's when I think organizations get the full power of like what you can be and the change that you can make and the leadership that you can exhibit. Where I'm like, when I reflect back to when I was feeling quite challenged, especially in a space where there wasn't a ton of representation and I didn't feel fully supported. I found myself as I went through a couple of years of coaching where I was slowly adapting to this culture that I didn't love. And you lose yourself a bit, like you lose pieces, and I felt like I was losing pieces of myself where there were some things where the things they brought me in because I had great energy or I had great leadership, the more I was challenged, the more I was adapting into something that I wasn't totally confident in. And then it creates this doubt because you're not operating in a space where you can be yourself and bring the skills that you kind of got hired for and brought in. They see you do this in another environment. They're like, come to our environment, come and be that here. And then the environment's so challenging that you change and then you keep changing. And 2 or 3 years down the road, you're like, this isn't what I wanted to be. Like this wasn't
Mhm.
this doesn't feel like me and it doesn't feel good. And it really challenges your confidence. And so you end up feeling less confident. And I feel like that's where that like catch the imposter syndrome of like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm doing it, but I don't know what I'm doing. When really you're like, I should know what I'm doing. I'm educated. I have a ton of experience. Like that's how I got here. Like Laura said, they gave me the key. But now I'm like, why is the lock changing? And then so, and it is. So it really challenges you when you're in a space that doesn't play to your, not even play to your skill set, but like a space where you can't be authentic, I think is
Mm.
really hard. And you find that, I do find that in cultures, the sport world has cultures that have just been there because this is how we've done it. And there's that superficial support of like, we want to support more women, we want more women in sport, but then not as many people are taking the actions to like do the training in the background, build the organization to support it, show that they are exemplifying gender equity.
Mhm.
And then so you get the beginning of like, we support you, but you're like, but how? How do you support me? Where's the stepping stones to like make sure this is actually happening?
Yeah. Laura, is that like a similar experience that you found in some of the challenges in your career?
Definitely. And Montana and I have spoken at length at this because I rely on Montana so much. But when I was at the club coaching level, I was the only female at our club for a while, and I felt like I had to be perfect, like Montana said earlier, like being the only female, it's a lot of pressure. I'm like, I have to be perfect. I have to be XYZ. I'm going to let down the entire gender if I have one little ski boot out of line. So that was a lot of pressure. And I felt like I couldn't take risks. I couldn't be vulnerable. And it was kind of difficult because I had no one to relate to my experience. And then I had no one kind of at my age. It was kind of a young coaching crew. So then I felt kind of funny the whole time, but kept trucking on. And then I'm working with Freestyle BC now, and I'm so grateful. It's such a supportive team. But the most exciting thing is I get to co-lead Girl Stylers with Lauren Ryan, who is an incredible coach. And we just really bounce a lot of things off each other. And I go to her all the time. And I also tell Freestyle BC, like, I feel like a fraud. I feel like an imposter every single day. And they kind of talk me off the ledge, which is great. But I don't know if those feelings ever go away. Maybe some days you're super confident, and then those little naysayer voices are in the back of your head and you get knocked back 2 steps. But it's so important to have people who you can trust and support you in kind of all the facets of yourself as a leader. So I've been quite fortunate in my recent journey to have that. But then I look back on where I started, and it has its ebbs and flows like everything. But the past 18 months have been really great and turn a corner.
I mean, I think that probably speaks to the community that you now have, right? Or even you saying like, I'm so thankful that I have Montana in my corner. That's important. And that's what it looks like when you do have kind of that space or
I just
psychological safety present. But I am cautious of time. I do want to or mention about the community practice that we're all kind of together, that focuses on advancing opportunities for women and gender equity. But in what ways has being a part of a community practice kind of added to your leadership whether that is kind of helping you navigate maybe imposter syndrome, similar to what Laura was talking about. And for those who may not be in a community of practice or a structured community of practice, that could also mean your support system outside of work or your partner. But Kim, maybe I'll turn to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I am still in a new role. And so I've really found that this community of practice has just really helped validate some things for our conversations that we have, and being able to bounce off ideas. And the way in which it was established, it just made it feel like this really positive space that a lot of us bring our authentic selves to. And so I do find when I am looking for that additional sounding board, and sometimes outside of our sport, because we do get very narrow focused, and we are all attempting to achieve similar things. So just being able to leverage those additional resources or ideas. And I have many hats in sport, as many of us do, and so being able to pull things that are a best practice from over here and then being able to translate and implement it over here, I find it's just shortening that curve a little bit as well too. And so I'm just really grateful for this community that we've built, and having people that I can talk to and throw something in a chat, and I know that I'll get a very honest response back to, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, it's a place to kind of have a sounding board, or kind of remove or move away from working in silo, and realizing that maybe there's someone else that's kind of having or experiencing or asking themselves the same questions that you are. But Emma, maybe I'll turn it to you. Tell me about kind of being a part of a community in practice, and what has that, or how has that added to your leadership experience?
Well, starting with the viaSport, the gender equity community of practice, I echo what Kim said. I've probably had less chance to come to the meetings than because my scheduling hasn't always allowed it. But I really appreciate the Slack channel and the resources that are posted there, and people sharing their thoughts. And I know that if I have questions about something, or like I'm a great believer in like sharing and taking from other people, but also giving my own resources if I've got them. And so it's been very, very helpful to have that place to be able to post and source out the information that will help you move forward in this area specifically. I think in an informal sense, like much the same as Kim, like I started along my leadership journey probably about 10 years ago, and I very intentionally did seek out other women because I didn't see as many at the time. And I found my people basically, and they were people that I called about work stuff. They were people who I called about not work stuff, or integrating family and work stuff. Mostly on the work front though. And that was really, really valuable to me. And I think the other piece that I want to touch on, because I think community of practice can be very valuable in this sense, is about leadership style, and starting to form your own leadership style, and having people that allow you to do that, where you can test that. Because I think, I mean, it's kind of linked to imposter syndrome, but we're taught or traditionally leadership has been seen as very directive and very definitive. And I struggle a lot with thinking about my own leadership style, because I'm much more collaborative and I like to hear what my team says, and I'm very open to saying, actually, I don't really know what I need to do at this point. Like, so who's got ideas, or I'm going to seek them out. Don't always have the answer. And so I think that as women, we can second guess ourselves as whether we should be in those roles, because we are, leadership is like, you're that strong person sending people into battle and you have a clear vision. Doesn't look like that for a lot of us. It certainly doesn't feel like that inside. And so I think that community of practice can be really beneficial when you find those people, mostly women in my experience, where you can sort of share that out and start to define your own leadership style. And it might look very different than what it does in a traditional sense.
I like that, though. It's important to kind of challenge, even though we may have a certain idea of what leadership may look like, that it's different for everyone, and kind of finding that personal style is important. Because that's part of authenticity, and kind of being yourself and being in a space where you can do so. But Montana, what about you? What's kind of being a part of a community practice, what's kind of added to your leadership journey or experience?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that comes up is the collaboration, to be able to collaborate with more people across more sports, has just been really rewarding personally, but also really inspiring and motivating within my professional life. Like having the chance to even just like I hopped on the chair at Fernie to go around with girl stylers and with Laura, and it was so refreshing, I think, to like connect with someone from the winter round so we know kind of the same things. I have no clue what I'm doing in that event space, so I just kind of like hung out on the sides. But it was really exciting to see people doing the same type of work in another space. And again, like skiing, there's so many different like sports and disciplines with or so many disciplines within skiing that you don't see it all the time. Everyone is quite siloed. So having the chance to have those opportunities of like in person seeing projects happen is so cool. And it really gives you a chance to like think about what you can do. And it also just gives you a feeling of collaboration and community, which is something that I know I've craved for so long. And then the other side is also seeing how much some other sports have progressed and really persevered in terms of that like proactive work. It's been like I feel like in the snow sports side, we're still in this such a formative stage of like how do we do this and how do we get more females in the space, and the policies and like the DEI work hasn't been done there yet. And we're like trying to figure it out as we go on the fly. And so it's nice to hear when other sports come in and say like, oh, we've had this like women's summit for the entire sport in BC, and it comes together and you're like, we like that's you realize there's things that you want to get to, and it gives you more of a pathway.
Mhm.
I think gives you a little more confidence that you're like kind of working along in the
Yeah.
realm or space.
Yeah, you're not so far off as you think, maybe after kind of being in community and finding that information or affirmation from others. But Laura, I'm curious if you were, or what's the one thing that you value the most in your leadership journey? And it doesn't need to specifically be community or practice, but if you were to think of your career as a whole, what's been kind of the biggest takeaway for you?
I think the biggest takeaway is just being able to be exposed to different women from all different sports within the community of practice. I've been so fortunate to be a part of it so early in my leadership journey, to learn from the fellow women on this panel, to know their experiences, to be involved with the Regional Sport Alliance and that multi-sport, and then Freestyle BC. I have such a diverse lens, and I think because of that, I'm taking bits and pieces from everything and learning from everyone, learning from shared experiences. So I think I'm pretty lucky to have such support now and diverse lens to hopefully carve my path into leadership. So I've been very fortunate to be included in these spaces.
It sounds like for everyone in some way or another, community and collaboration, or even just a space to kind of bounce off ideas has been the biggest takeaway. And so it's amazing to see what we can do when we have those spaces to be able to connect. But we're almost at 10:30, so I'd like to pass it over to Kevin. But before we do, thank you, Emma, Kim, Laura, and Montana for sharing your insight.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Vanessa. Really great conversation. Thank you to the panelists. You and the others that I've seen in the registry of attendees here, they were part of the community of practice. Like the work that we do together and like the way everybody just like listens and there's a very flat curve in that room, and a lot of authentic self shows up in that work. So just really a lot of gratitude for everybody involved in this panel. And if people are interested in participating in this community of practice that is led by all of these fabulous women, just drop me an email and we can kind of link you in and sort of provide you a little bit of insight into what we are at, where we're going, and a little bit of introduction to the Slack channel that we use sort of virtually. But the meetings are very easy. They're a lot of just holding the space for others The meeting's just in your calendar. If you can come, you can come. If you can't, you can't. But we love when people can contribute. So that's one way to do it. And then I will briefly plug, if you want to deepen your efforts in this area, Canadian Women in Sport has both the playbook program and the game plan program that they are offering right now. And I'll pop the link in the chat, or there's a bunch of QR codes. Oh, it's not letting me. I have to make it a PDF, but I will email it out with the information after this meeting. Are there any questions for the panelists before we have to jump off?
Just lots of gratitude and appreciation for the alignment, the sharing, the vulnerability, and the insights that we're able to glean. So thank you, everyone. Your great thoughts and contributions.
Great, thanks, Josh. And thank you to those like executive directors that allow your staff to be on these calls. Like building it into the work plan and making gender equity a priority is like definitely a key to advancing this work. All right, well, thank you. And next time you'll have Jared back.